are many different types of screen printing inks. And when you're buying an ink from a manufacturer, your supplier, a lot of the times they've taken steps to essentially add additional chemicals to the ink to give it different capabilities. Now, what is a good idea is if you're a screen print shop, purchase a handful of additives that you can have on the shelf to be able to manipulate your inks when you want to give them special effects and again, more capabilities. Now, some of these additives really must be there for certain types of inks, while others are more of a bonus capability. Now, when it comes to additives, there's really just a handful of basic ones that are most commonly used. The first is going to be some type of Visco minus or Visco reducer. That is going to essentially make the ink a little bit thinner and easier to work with without really killing your opacity. The big thing is we don't want to be altering the color of our ink or how well it performs. We're more or less trying to make it easier when we're using Visco minus. You can also use something called Visco plus, which will actually thicken the ink up, which you sometimes will help a little bit when it comes to opacity. Now, instead of using Visco plus, you can also use something called thickening powder. And thickening powder is essentially a powder, unlike a liquid. And the thickening powder is very handy for, again, making an ink a little bit thicker, and which can sometimes help with opacity. Thickening powder is often referred to as Capacil, and you'd be surprised. You add a little bit of it to a white, and all of a sudden it pops. Now, something very important to know about all of these additives and chemicals: respect the chemistry. Every one of these, every ink that you use, it's going to tell you, hey, you might want to add this additive and so forth, but every one of these additives is going to tell you, do not put more than this percentage in the ink, or you're going to start risking one, the durability, and then actually two, the actual product itself, the end color, how it prints and so forth. Outside of thickening powder and Visco, you sometimes are going to use something called an S additive. S additive, the S standing for stretch. And when it comes to ink being durable, the more stretch, the more durable it is. If you're using a polyester or a performance-based ink for sports jerseys and stuff, it's going to naturally already have some S additive in it. But if you are using everyday ink, it's never a bad idea to throw a little bit in there. Let the ink be a little bit more stretchable, and it kind of will naturally make it a little bit thinner, easier to work with without changing the opacity at all. Now, kind of similar to the stretch additive, is something called soft hand based, except I call it similar because it's more like the stretch additive is ideally used with the performance inks versus the soft hand is more with your everyday, because it's going to make it a little bit softer and a little bit more stretchable, but do not use too much of the soft hand base, as you will kill its opacity and you can really hurt its durability. But it can really make the ink a lot creamier and easier to work with. One misconception is that thicker ink equals more opaque. That is often the case, but not always. So always, look at an ink, test it, and then maybe you want to add some of these additives, but always be doing so at the correct percentage ratio. So that means you need a high quality scale that's going to measure to the gram and be able to put exact percentages in there, record them, so if you ever have to mix that color again, you know exactly how you did it, so you're getting the same results. The last two types of additives I want to talk about is a puff additive and then something called a catalyst. Now, puff additive has to be used when you want to make the ink essentially puff off of a garment. This will essentially create a 3D effect. Puff additive often comes in either a powder or actual liquid base form. You can also buy puff in an actual base type. The last is the actual catalyst. Now, catalyst is used for a range of inks, primarily like discharge, silicone, in which we must be mixing the ink right before we print it, and that catalyst allows it to bond together, and it's used for either adhesion or actually allow the ink to do its job and perform the color it needs to when it's going through the dryer. So again, all of these additives, they will help the ink perform better, but if you don't respect their chemistry and use too much of any of them, they can really start hurting the ink and cause all types of problems. If you have any questions on the different types of ink additives and how to use them, please do not hesitate contacting us. Thank you.